I don't know about you, but I find brush lettering with like an actual brush pen really difficult. So oftentimes, rather than using a brush pen, I'll just use a regular pen and fake the calligraphy. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to figure out how to do fake calligraphy, or what I like to call fauxligraphy, for all of the letters of the alphabet. In particular, we're going to be focusing on the lowercase ones because they are probably going to be the most useful. But we do also have a free printable resource. That one's linked in the description box, which goes through the entire alphabet, both uppercase and lowercase. So if you want to see those uppercase letters and how they work as well, it's a really good place to, check out. Make sure that you have that one. It's free to download. You just have to go to the page that's linked at the top of the description box. So as you can kind of see here though, when it comes to doing fake calligraphy or fauxligraphy, you're effectively just working with your regular pen and doing an outline of what would be a kind of calligraphy style lettering style. Yeah. So we have those kind of thickened sections, which you'd be, pressing down harder with your brush marker to achieve if you were doing more traditional calligraphy, or as traditional as you can get with this kind of a pen. But rather than doing that, you just do kind of an outline of the letter and then you thicken up parts of that letter to make it look like it was brush lettered. From there, you can then go and fill those in either with, just the regular pen you've been writing with, or you can get a little bit more creative with it and, color it in different colors and do like gradient effects and all of that kind of stuff. We'll take a look at those later on, but the first thing we're really going to need to focus on is like, how do we actually draw these letters out? Okay. So if you do download the lettering sheet that we have here, the practice one, then it gives you a bunch of letters to practice with. Funnily enough, that's why it's called a practice sheet. So you can kind of hopefully see that all of these letters are based on just drawing the original letter out. So if we kind of trace over that, so we can see A is here. This one's a little bit more bouncy than my regular lettering style. And then once you've done that outline of your regular lettering, you can go in and do those thickened up sections. We're not actually going to be working with this lettering sheet today, right? That's just there for your own personal practice, especially if you find that certain letters are a little bit harder to form or whatnot. For instance, I find that S is really difficult for me. Also finding a Z and an F that I really like the style of. So this could be useful for that kind of a practice. We're going to set this one to the side though. We're not actually using it today, but it is there if you want to, help yourself out, especially with, the combination of capitals and lowercase. But setting that one to the side and our brush pen, because that's not what we're here for. That's not the business. Okay. If you want to do this along with us, you're going to need something to write on and something to write with. I'm using a Papermate Flare because I like the size of it. It's a nice kind of thick, bold black line, which I figured would be kind of nice to show up on camera today. And I'm just using Archer and Olive Dot Grid notebook. You do not need to use anything too fancy. It can just be on scrap paper. I do say though that if you have something with guidelines, even if they're very minimal guidelines like a dot grid journal, then that can be useful for making it so that like as you're practicing, you're getting the same kind of size of the letters, making sure that they're aligned and stuff like that. Okay? So, when it comes to doing your fauxligraphy, the first thing you're really going to need to do is write out your letters, funnily enough. Okay. So, we're going to do them individually, like letter by letter, rather than go in with any kind of words, because I think that getting the basic building blocks of your words right is probably a pretty good place to start. So, A, probably a good place to start at the start of the alphabet. Like we could get a little crazy with it, but I don't really want to. When it comes to writing in your notebook, obviously I like to write on an angle, so make sure that you put it in a comfortable way for your hand. I'm going to be writing a little bit bigger than I usually do as well, so if any of my letters get a little bit weird, I'm going to chalk it up to that. But lowercase a, put that guy here. Now, already there is, opportunity for your personal embellishments here, okay? So if you want to have it slightly italicized, if you want to have it directly upright, if you want to do a different style of A, if you want to add flourishes, all right, there's all of these different possibilities. I'm going to be trying to keep mine fairly basic as we go through, but lowercase a looking pretty good. Now, when it comes to doing fauxligraphy and doing those thickened sections, the only parts you really want to thicken are what we call the downstrokes. So if we have a look at A and how we wrote that, we can see that I started here and my pen went up. Okay, so that's what we would call an upstroke. And then from there, it went down the side. So that would be the downstroke. When we hit the bottom, we went up to the other side, so that is another upstroke. Then coming down here, downstroke, and up again, okay? You do not have to go through and annotate all of your letters. This is just to kind of highlight where those upstrokes and downstrokes are. Anywhere we've done a downstroke, though, is going to be where we're going to put those thickened sections. But as said, we're just starting with the alphabet for now, so we're going to draw out all of our letters first and then go back in and have a look at how we would actually go and make those fauxligraphy or kind of calligraphy-esque. Now, when you're writing these out, what can take a little bit of getting used to, and it's going to become more apparent later, is that when you write out your letters, you actually want to make them a little bit wider than you typically would. Okay? So if you tend to write your A's very narrow, for instance, for our fauxligraphy and actually to make it so that those thickened up sections have enough space to breathe, we're going to make that letter just a little bit wider than we usually would. So you can see I've made mine quite wide across here. The kind of circular portion here is quite open. So then when I go and thicken up those downstrokes, it actually has some room to be rather than this one, which kind of limits how much space I can take up with those thickened up sections. But A is good. We can do B. There's a lot of different ways to do B. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do all of our letters. So just do what feels right to you. I typically like to do a B like this. So it comes down and then bounces over the top. Some people like to just kind of curl it around, but you do you. This is your lettering style. We want to make it comfortable for you. C doesn't usually have a lot of variation, so we'll chuck a C in. And we'll do D here. I will say that I am not going to be making my letters super consistent in terms of how big they are compared to each other. I'm just trying to make it so that we can actually see what we're doing. Okay, so A, B, C, D looking good. Go down a couple lines. We'll write E and F. F being one of those letters that I am still yet to find a style that I really, really like, but this is my current style of F. Of course, when you start to actually write words together and join them up, they do start to look a little different, but thinking about individual letters as they stand by themselves, G and H. You don't have to do the curly stuff, right? It's all good if you're just doing like, I don't know, block H like this. This guy works too. Nice. H. We've got I. Do I need to dictate all of these? No, you guys probably know the alphabet in the same order I do. So K we're going to put a little bit further over. And K is one of those letters that has a fair few different ways that we can do it too. I do a, I don't know, looped top K. Some people like to do just, I don't know, what's that? Is that the greater than symbol or the less than symbol? One of the two. J, K, L. Now, when it gets to M, this is one of those letters where it is quite important that we try and make it a little bit wider. If you make your M too close together, when you go and try and thicken up those downstrokes, it's going to be really difficult to get it looking nice. So make your M wider than you think it needs to be. It'll look a little bit silly probably, but it is going to pay off when you come to do those thickened up sections. And now I need to remind myself to do the same. So M, we're going to make it quite a bit wider than we usually would. M, and then N, L, M, N, O. Does anybody else have to sing almost the full alphabet to find your place? Because that is very much me. L, M, N, O, and I'm going to do P here. For me, P goes down, and then it comes back up and curves over. Q is another one of those fun letters that people have some varying styles with. So for me, a Q is effectively like you start as if you're going to draw an A, but then it's like, haha, I'm going all the way down, and then it flicks up to the middle and over to whatever the next letter is, usually a U. All right? So elemento P, Q, R. R is another one, has some variants. I typically do R's with the curl at the top and then curving down like this. But I only actually started doing R's that way when I started doing, like, these kind of lettering styles that I use in my journal and such. So you might do your R like this. You might want to do your R like this. That's fine too. And then it curves over and connects to the next letter. Whatever is, your typical writing style here, we're kind of trying to play in with that. J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, R, S. Oh, S, the dreaded letter. So S for me is going to look like this. T for me is gonna look like this with its little cut through. TRST. I'm really showing my inability to remember the alphabet here. U, V, W, another one that we want to make a bit wider than feels, I don't know, right. STUVW, X, which I'm going to do like this because my X would usually join off here, and Y. And the dreaded Z, which I'm going to do as a curly Z. Not a lot of words have Z in it, so it's usually not too much of a problem, but, you know, we're trying to be thorough here. Okay, so now as we have all of our letters written out, we can go and start to think about, well, where are we actually going to put those thickened sections to make it so that then it looks a little bit more calligraphy-like rather than just, I don't know, monoline cursive, okay? So like we said, anytime we brought our pen in a downward direction, that's where we're going to want to try and thicken things up. So for an A, that would be this kind of like side section here, and then the stem part here. For a B, we're thinking, you know, again, that kind of side region there goes down. And then we curve the pen back up, goes down again, and then the pen curves back up. Okay, C, nice and easy, just here, that's the downward section. For D, we have the downward section here, and then we curve up, and that entire stem on the side goes down, so on and so forth. We're going to just look at effectively where we would put them. Now, if you're ever kind of stuck, you're like, oh gosh, I don't actually know where the downwards kind of section is. I don't know where I should be thickening it up. This is where those kind of lettering sheet practice things can be really useful because they effectively show you where you should be putting that. Should, you know, you do you, this is your lettering, but where ideally those thickened up sections are actually going to go. So in the case of A, like we said, it's that downward stroke there and there. For B, it's that downward stroke on the side and then in the side here, so on and so forth. The full alphabet is available on that sheet, but putting that to the side. When it comes to doing the thickened up section, there is going to be certain kind of spaces on the letter that you just kind of feel gravitated towards putting the thickened section. And for the most part, we want to lean into that, okay? So if we think about the letter A here and where we could thicken that, for each of those downstrokes, we could either thicken it to like the left or to the right, or what I like to think about it is in terms of this loop. I usually will thicken a looped section on the inside of the loop. So for an A, that'll be thickening it here, thickening it there on the inside of the loop, rather than if we compare it to this guy, trying to thicken it on the outside would look a little bit strange, but it is a way to save a letter that you've drawn that's a little bit too narrow, yeah? So for instance, in this one, because it was a narrower letter form, if I tried to put that thickened section on the inside, the letter would end up looking really, really squashed. I can kind of save that letter by putting that thickened section on the outside. Now, you do not have to use a different color pen for your thickened sections. I'm just doing it so that we can kind of see what we're playing with here. When it comes to the other side of the A, though, we need to curve it over at the top, or you can draw it straight, but I prefer having a little curve to it because then it kind of looks a little bit more, I don't know, natural. And then we can bring that down to the bottom to make that thickened section, okay? So it looks pretty much exactly the same. Like, there's no difference. Oh my gosh, uncanny, the resemblance. Okay, maybe not. But you can see how we've effectively faked that thickened section by just going and drawing in those additional lines on the top of the kind of regular lettering style we're using, okay? So that's kind of what we're playing around with. I can see that a couple of people, mentioning that, oh gosh, my handwriting looks messy and, it just looks like I've kind of like scribbled all over the paper kind of a thing. Much like any skill, these things do take time, all right? Like, I have had many years of practice and this end still looks weird, all right? So as you do this more, as you get more practice in, it is going to become a lot easier to, well, one, know where the thickened sections should go, and two, draw letter forms that you're, pretty happy with. I also typically don't go in with pen first. So if this is, a new skill for you, you're just trying to build it, go in with pencil, get your letters in a way that you like, and then once you're happy with how they look, commit to the pen after that. Okay, so in terms of our thickened sections though, we're going to want to thicken the downstrokes on the B. For the B, I typically again like to put anything that's in a kind of looped section internal. So this looped section here, I'm going to put the thickened downstroke on the inside of that loop. Okay, looks pretty cute. And similar idea for this larger stem on the side. I'm going to thicken that from the top going down. When it comes to putting in your thickened sections, we do want to try and be fairly consistent with how wide we make them, okay? Because if you start to do thickened sections that, like, one's quite narrow, one's quite thick, it can look a little bit strange. There are going to be certain letters where you do want a slight difference. For instance, K is usually one of those weird ones where you might want a little bit of a difference between different parts that you're thickening up. But for the most part, for the majority of our letters, we do want to try and keep it fairly consistent. Again, it's one of those things that just comes with practice. The dreaded P word. So for C, this to me, it's not a completely closed off loop, but it still is part of a loop. So I'm going to be putting that thickened section on the inside of the C. Again, though, we could put it on the outside if we need to like save our lettering because we've made something too narrow. For D, we're doing that on the inside here. And then we could do it on the left or right of the stem. I'm going to be doing it on the right because of that loop at the top. It just looks a little bit more natural to me to have it inside of that loop rather than outside of it. Okay. If you have any questions as we go through, do make sure to just tag me in the question at JashiiCorrin so that it kind of comes up really bright and red on my screen, just so that I can see that you have something you want to ask. But I'm going to go through and thicken these up, and hopefully that'll kind of illustrate where those, downstrokes actually are. We can then go in after the fact and label them to make sure that we kind of can very easily see where they all sit. But also just going to make sure that I can see the chat as we go through. Okay, so for F, that larger stem is the one that is a downstroke. Everything else goes up. For G, very similar to A, we're going to go inside of the loop and then down the side of the stem, curving it nicely into the bottom. Okay, this is all of this stuff. Like we said, it just takes a little bit of practice to get it looking nice. Right, for the H, and then we can curve over the top and down for the H. I find that these kind of letters like H, M, N, where the kind of curved section at the top changes direction, those ones can also be a potential pain point. All right. Okay, question. Maybe I missed it, but are the lines straight or is it curved? This can be a personal style choice, right? So I am at the moment kind of curving it with the letter form. So hopefully if I just zoom in a little bit, shake the camera around while I do it, there we go. So hopefully you can kind of see how that A, it like curves with the letter form that we drew in to start with, but you can make it just straight and that will be just like a different kind of style. So we put this guy back down so we can kind of see what I'm talking about. We'll just freeze that again. So with the A, if you draw out your A like this, okay, there we go, and you just want to do them straight on the inside, it's not necessarily going to look like kind of quote proper calligraphy, but you can do it as just a style choice. Right, so hopefully you can kind of see the difference between this guy and this guy. This one is a little bit more curved to the letter form. This one is just going to be straight, and it just gives you a slightly different finished product. Yeah, you can also then, like we said, make it your own, go in after the fact, draw it in with color it in or put in a pattern or whatever else. We're going to look at some variants after we've done the rest of these letters, but that's kind of where you can go with it. But for the H that we have here, we're going to put it to the side. As said, there is a natural tendency to go in a certain direction. For the most of my letters, I usually put the thickened downstroke to the right because that's what feels most comfortable, unless it's part of a loop, and then it'll just be internal. I mean, for the most part, that also ends up being to the right, but to the right is usually where it's at. So if we do the other side of the H, so we're going to curve it over the top, down the side, and kind of trying to keep it roughly in the same kind of shape or kind of direction that our original line work was going. Eye is nice and easy, so we want to thicken up that part. You also typically want to, what I'm going to say, thicken up the dot of the eye as well, so that it doesn't look kind of weird. There we go. That looks kind of cute. Same idea with the J, right? So J is one of those letters where I kind of start to maybe break my own rules. I kind of treat a J similar to how I treat a G. So if I was going with the rule of always doing internal, right? If I was doing always internal for this one, because we have a loop at the bottom of the J, the thickening should be on the left. But I'm going to do it on the right this time because if I put it on the left, that loop is going to start to look a little bit too closed in, right? And this is where there's like a little bit of nuance to it. Obviously, like if you've drawn your J so that that loop is a little bit wider, then yes, you might be able to put it on the left-hand side. It's just trying to figure out specifically for the style of lettering that you're doing, you know, because everybody's handwriting is different. Where is that thickened section going to look the most reasonable? And this is why doing pencil first can be really, really beneficial. So for me, that is going to be on the right-hand side, so curving it over the top, following the letter form down, and then capping it off at the bottom. Effectively, you want to try and finish your thickened section wherever the pen starts to kind of change direction, effectively. So it kind of like sweeps into itself. As soon as it starts to kind of level out and it's no longer going down anymore, that's where we want to make it so that that thickened section kind of stops. So you can kind of see that for, you know, the internal part of the B here, rather than continuing that thickened section off to the left-hand side as it sweeps around, we're trying to like cap it off as soon as we get to that end of the downward stroked section. Yeah. So for K, this is one of those letters that is just so much fun. We love K in the sense that it's really bloody difficult and it's probably one of my biggest pain points. Now for this one, because of how I've drawn it, I would probably be more inclined to do the thickened section on this one to the left. And the reason for that is that I want this part here, where all of the lines kind of connect to each other, to still be on the edge of that kind of brush stroke section. Okay, we're going to draw K out a couple more times so I can kind of show you what I mean. We're just going to kind of do a little comparison point between the two of them. So we're going to try and keep them roughly looking the same. So we got 1 and 2, and then from the middle we have out and over, out and over. Okay, so the potentials here. We could thicken to the left or thicken to the right for that larger downstroked kind of stem. If I thicken it to the left, we're going to again curve over from the top, come down, and cap it off. And you can see that then if I go and fill that in, all of that kind of, I don't know, what I'm just going to call the noodle mess, but it's effectively where everything meets here at that point is still on the outside of that stem, and that looks neater to me compared to trying to do it internally, where we've really closed off that loop, and now things don't really meet at the point that I want them to. Okay? So just in case that's a little bit tricky to see, I'm going to go and color it in, just so that then we can kind of appreciate how that would look once you go and fill in your fauxligraphy. So we'll color that in, color that in. So in the case of doing the inside of the loop, like we kind of talked about, we can see that these parts here don't actually meet up anymore. They're kind of spread out from each other because we've cut off the point where they all met together. And we also have a closing in of this loop that doesn't look as nice, at least by my standard, all right? So it is a personal choice. If you're fine with this and that actually looks quite nice to you, then yes, go forth. For me personally, I prefer it when those, stems, loops, or whatnot, they all kind of meet on the edge of the letter and they're not obstructed by the downstroke. Okay, so like we said, there's a little bit of nuance to this. You're going to want to play around with it a little bit more to find where it suits for your lettering style. Because if yours wasn't all connected, or if you do your Ks differently, maybe it's a completely different deal, right? So when it comes to doing K though, and in terms of those thickening of the downstrokes, if we go and have a look at where this actually is, okay? So for K, we started here. Funnily enough, we started at the start. We curved upwards, Okay, so an upstroke we don't do any thickening for, so that's fine. We then came around the top and went down. That is a downstroke. And then we stopped here. Okay, from there you could, of course, continue with your pen and go up around the loop, but I took my pen off the page, so it stopped. Okay, then for the K, we come up or kind of to the right, upwards, in an upwards-ish direction, up over that way. Okay, so that's an upstroke. That's fine. We don't need to worry about that. But then we come down to the side. Okay, this downward section is actually very short-lived. And then really we're more so going left than we are down. So that's something to consider when we're doing our downstrokes. Like how much of that do we actually go and fill in? Similar idea with our little tail end here. It's still going in a downwards direction, but is a lot more horizontal than it is vertical. Okay, so kind of downwards to the right, and then uptick again to that right hand side. And this is again where that nuance starts to creep in. If you've done your K so that this final stroke is a lot more downward, then you're probably going to want to thicken it up. If you've done it so that it's a lot more horizontal, then possibly you don't want to thicken it up. Okay, we're going to draw out a couple more Ks with a little bit more exaggerated features so we can kind of go and have a look at that. But we have a question. Alrighty, if you cover the tail when you do the outside thickening, do you then go back and extend it to make it visible again? Often, yes. Like for this guy here, I would probably go and draw it out a little bit further so that then it kind of like present still looks kind of cute, especially if K was the first letter in a word. I like those little tails. I think that they look kind of sweet, so I will usually go and extend them. Or when I'm drawing it out to start with, I'll kind of exaggerate them first so that then they're always going to be present, right? So for the K, like we said, we're going to thicken up on the outside for the way that I drew my K because that loop will be too narrow otherwise. And then we're going to go and look at some exaggerated Ks to kind of have a look at how it's gonna form out. So we'll do a looped K where this part is very much up, down. We'll do a looped K where this is very looped down, and we'll do a K that's a bit more like a fancy looking R, right? Like we said, if you're drawing your letters out, do try to make them a little bit wider. I haven't done that for myself, thus making everything more difficult. But we're going to go and have a look at how we would thicken up each of these. So in each instance, the downstroke on the side is just what it is, nice and easy. And I'm going to put those on the outer because it looks a little bit more reasonable to me. Again, making sure to try and not go too far into something that isn't actually down. Like for instance, this guy here probably shouldn't have started at the very top because we actually look at it in a vertical alignment. You can see that this one's a little bit more to the left than it is specifically down, but that's all right because we're really messing around with the side on the right hand side to try and figure out how we would put things in there. So for this first one, you can hopefully see that this first stroke of the side of the K is a lot more vertical than some of the ones we've drawn previously. So this guy I would thicken it from the side and it would go in. And as it kind of levels out, you can see it kind of tucks into the middle. So that doesn't look too bad. In terms of the little tail here, it kind of comes out a little bit more towards the right than it is going down. So a little bit more towards the right. But then this section in the middle is distinctly in a downwards direction. So when I thicken this part up, I'm going to make the thickening of this part at the top a lot more narrow than the thickening of the middle section. Might be a little bit hard to understand what I'm saying, but hopefully it'll make more sense when you see it. But the thickened part at the top is going to be quite narrow. It's then going to widen up a little. And then as it goes off to the end, it's going to thin out again. Okay, K is one of those letters that does just take a little bit more practice, especially like, finding it in a style that works for you, finding it in, a style that works with your style of lettering already. But that's why we have the practice sheet there, all right, so that you can help yourself out. Also, we've got a tink, so tink, there we go, beautiful. For this K here, Technically speaking, the only down section of that loop is very small, so you could go in and put a tiny thickened section in there if you wanted to, if you thought it looked nice, or you could leave it open. A lot of the time people do just leave the side of the K open, and that's fine too. Then this part of our flick goes quite distinctly down, which is nice, so we can thicken that part up. As it starts to level off though, we then cap it off, just kind of merging it with the line we already had there. Looks pretty good. Similar idea with this curved part here. So we have a distinct upstroke and then down. I could put it internal, and usually I would like to, but because it is quite narrow, we're going to put it on the outside instead. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then, just like we had last time, just a little bit of that downward stroke before it flicks back up. Okay, a lot of different variations with K because there's just so many different ways that you could have formed it, and it very much depends on how much down to across kind of ratio you have with your section. Right, with the K that I've drawn here, the only part that I would genuinely consider to be a down section would be this kind of very right-hand portion of the loop. So I'm going to go and thicken that part internally. But you see how I haven't curved it the whole way down, because at the bottom of that loop, it is a lot more to the left than it is in a downwards direction, okay? And this is where kind of like those little arrows can kind of help us. You do not have to go and draw arrows all over your letters though. That would be very kind of time and labor intensive. But as you do this more, being able to recognize those downstrokes is going to be a lot easier. Okay, so we have had a question about whether you can join the team. Of course, you can join the team with a capital T. We do have the link to join either through Patreon or through YouTube in the description box as well. So, moving forward, L, that one's nice and easy, just one long downstroke there. Trying to keep it consistent, but also not doing a good job of it because our journal is at a distance to us, at least for me. So, when it comes to the M, all right, and this is where we said like you want to make it a bit wider than you typically would draw it. M can be one of those letters that, again, like the K, is a little bit tricky because you kind of want parts to match up on certain sections of the letter. Let me show you what I mean, okay? So with the M as we've drawn it, even though he's a little bit wonky, but he's here, the down sections on this are anytime we've gone like over the top and down to the bottom. And we're gone over the top and down to the bottom. And over the top and down to the bottom, and then off to join the next letter. Okay? So any of those downward sections that go whoop, 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 those are the parts that are going to get thickened up, just like every letter. When it comes to thickening these up, we can again pick the left or the right. I typically prefer to do it towards the right, so we're going to thicken it up that way, but then we're going to have a look at some different variations that we can get, okay? So down to the side, but you can see here, now that side of the M doesn't actually match up perfectly with the bottom. That's okay, we're going to have a look at that in a second. Do the same thing on this one. And the same thing on this one, kind of curving over the top and then curving back into the letter. You kind of want to make it so that then any thickened section you include feels like a line continuation from the line you've already done, all right? In some of these ones, we obviously like curved them over and kind of capped them off. For this one, we want to try and make it look as natural as possible, like it continues on from those upstrokes as it continues down to the bottom of the letter. Now, like we said though, there are some sections on this M that are looking a little bit strange just because of the way that, I typically draw an M. We like the bounce to come from the very bottom of the downstroke, when we change the direction of the pen. But once we put the thickened sections in, that's now coming from the middle, right? So one of the ways that you can get around this, one of the ways that can be kind of useful, is rather than drawing out the full letter, is drawing it out section by section. Okay, so in that case, I would start by drawing out the first part of the M, and then I would stop and put the thickened section in before I continue. For this one, I'm going to put the thickened section on the left just so that we can kind of see the difference. Okay, so put that thickened section in. Once I've done that one, then I have the corner here, which I can continue from. So put it over. and then add that thickened section in, and then continue over, and put that thickened section in. Now, hopefully, as we've gone through, you can kind of see the other potential fix for doing the M. So in this one, I put all of the thickened sections towards the right, okay? So when I did the letter form here, towards the right of that initial line is where I put in that darkened, or like where I put in that kind of thickened line. I have technically used different colors. It might be a little hard to see. I'll bring it a little bit closer to the camera so that hopefully it's easier to see that there is a difference there, okay? So in this one, I put all of the thickened sections towards the right-hand side, just because that's usually what's comfortable for me, okay? When I've done this one though, you can see that I've put all of those thickened sections towards the left. And even just by doing that, I technically could have written out M just, as a general letter and then gone and put the thickened sections in after the fact. But because I would have put them on the left-hand side rather than the right, it means that that part where the pen changes direction would still actually be on the side of the thickened section. Now, that was a lot of words all at once, so I'm going to put this down. I'm going to kind of re-explain what I just said, just in case you're like, wait, what? Huh? That's too many directions, Jess. I'm confused, okay? So just like we talked about with the K, I really like it. Get a different color. I really like it when all of those lines meet at the side of the thickened section. Right? I find that to be an attractive letter. Personal opinion here. Similar idea with the M. I like it when the change in the pen direction is on the very side of the letter, or that thickened section. Right on the side there. Looks cute. In this case, that wouldn't be what would happen, okay? Because I've thickened that downstroke towards the right-hand side, it means that the point where I've changed direction is now going to be covered up by the thickening, right? And I don't like that as much. I don't think it looks as nice, okay? So again, it's a personal preference thing. You will find what works best for you. But one of the possible ways forward is thickening to a different side, right? So in this case, thickening to the left rather than to the right. Or you can take it more stepwise, right? So do the first curve of the M, thicken that up, then put in the second curve of the M, thicken that up, so on and so forth. All right. So hopefully that has been helpful. We're going to continue on, right? So for N, it can be essentially the same thing. Like you can try thickening it from the other side. We're going to just extend this part of the N so that then we can thicken it so that then we do not cover up. We haven't covered up where that turning point is, which looks nice. Okay. And we're going to put that there. Looks pretty cute. For an O, I personally prefer to have it be an internal thing. So the O curve is going to go here. Looks cute. You can also do the top loop if you've done enough of a kind of swoop that it actually kind of has a downward section. So for me, the downward section would be here, all right, just there, because after then it kind of starts to continue off on a more horizontal direction. When it comes to the P, again, if you want that point to be very noticeable, you can either thicken this to the left and have that point present, or you could thicken it to the right and then have that thickened section cover up some of that line work. I'm going to thicken this one to the left in the assumption that I would like to keep that line work. All right. So now it does curve or like come out of the very bottom of that thickened section. Personal preference though. For the P, we go up to the right, then we come down. Because this is kind of a looped section, I like it to be more internal. That looks good. But if you drew that kind of squash and you needed it to be on the outside, that also works as well, right? Depends on your lettering. So far, so good though. All right. This is looking pretty good. For Q, the bane of my existence, honestly. But for Q, we can do the internal part of the loop. That one's pretty similar to like A and G and D. They all have that kind of structure of that looped section. When it comes to the downward stroke of the Q, this is where a little bit of pre-planning can be nice, okay? We could always thicken it to the left and then have it kind of, join up there, which is what I'm going to do. That looks kind of cute, okay? Or you could thicken it to the right-hand side, but then that bounce might get covered over, all right? And then that line would look a little bit broken. So you might either want to put the little bounce a little bit further to the right so that it doesn't get covered up by any thickening, or you could just say, you know what, I don't really care if it's covered over, I'm just going to put it there. Alrighty. Question. Could you thicken it to just where the lines meet, leaving almost a dagger point bottom? Yes, certainly could. Like for instance, on the P, you could kind of bring it down to a pointed curve if you want to. You could technically do that with a lot of our letters that kind of finish towards the end. It's really just a personal preference thing. So if you want to have letter styles, I'm just going to do it with maybe an R. If you want to have a letter style that looks a little bit more like this, you could do it like that, so it's a little bit pointed. Similar idea to what we said before with the straight version of the thickened sections. If you want to tweak slightly how you like do them, you're going to end up with a different finished product. And if that's what you want, then that's really cool. I also find that like if you're going to do something like this with the pointed sections, you want to probably pre-plan where is going to look good for a point, you know? So for instance, like R finished at a point here, that looks kind of cute. You could also finish the other side of the R with a point. It just depends on whether that's going to work for the style that you're going for. Alrighty. Question. Do you know how to write really old school calligraphy? I don't. I know kind of the general gist of it, but I haven't actually practiced it myself. So it's one of those ones that definitely would take me a lot more practice than I've given it so far. When it comes to the R, we're going to get out our red pen actually. We're going to do some lines for this one. So R, we have the curve that comes up the side, right? And then loops around over the top and then down. Okay, downward stroke, our little alarm bells like ding, 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 right? We're gonna need to thicken that up. Comes to a point here, and then it goes down again, and then up to the right-hand side. When it comes to doing the thickened sections on this, oftentimes people don't actually thicken up the loop. Personal preference, depends on what you like. I'm going to at least thicken up this end here, because that makes sense. And with this loop, I'm only going to thicken the part which is very definitely in a downwards direction. When it starts to kind of curve over to the right-hand side, I'm not going to thicken up that part. So as soon as that pen kind of changes direction, and then kind of merging it in to the line work that we already had. So hopefully you can see that it's just that distinctly downward part really that we've done the thickening on, not the entire stroke all the way through to the kind of tail end of the R. The pointy part of the R looks kind of vampiric. Yes, it does kind of, doesn't it? And there's some very cool lettering styles you can find online. I will also say with the lettering practice sheet that I've given you guys as well, this one is a freebie. It is free to download. You just need to jump over to the resource library. But every month through our, team with a capital T perks, my team members also get a lettering sheet with a different lettering style. Sometimes we do like a monoline cursive if you want to just practice your cursive. Sometimes we do things that are a little bit more decorative and fun. But the idea is that all of them can be done with hand lettering. Like all of them can be done with just like pens that you already probably have. Some of them might be slightly better for brush lettering. Some of them might be better for just a monoline kind of thing that we're doing here. But that one comes out tomorrow. So if you're already part of the team with a capital T, then you have that to look forward to. Can't remember which style we've gone for this month, but all good things. For this R, I'm going to thicken it to this side because I actually like it when the side of the R comes out from the middle of the letter, not from the bottom. Again, personal preference. And it curves over to the side here. Looks pretty cute. Now, when it comes to S, as I said, S is one of those letters that Jess is like hit with a struggle bus with, all right? S is the bane of my existence. Let me know, of the letters, thinking about lowercase first, of the lowercase letters, which of the lowercase letters is your biggest pain point? Obviously, we're not finished yet. We're going to keep going. S is one of them for me when it comes to fauxligraphy in particular, and Z is one of those ones that I just cannot find a nice style that I really genuinely like. This is the most common kind of cursive style, but it doesn't really sit so well with me. So when it comes to S though, In terms of thickening of that downstroke, oftentimes what people will do is that they consider the entire middle section of the S to be a downstroke. So I'm going to write S here with a red pen. And then we're going to go and cover over the parts that are distinctly not downstrokes. Okay, well, we got X, K, fair. Handwriting is your biggest pain point, also fair. So for S, when we start, we're going towards the top. Okay, we get to the top of the letter, and then we're still going over more than anything. And then from about this point onwards is when we start to kind of change direction. We're going more in a downwards direction from there. So we go down, 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 and we get to the bottom of the letter, and then we're going back to the top, okay? So that entire middle section there of the S is often considered to be a downstroke. We're going to bring that a little closer so you can kind of see who we're talking about here. So everything there in red is the downward stroke of the S, okay? But when we come to thicken this up, it can be very difficult to thicken it just on one side of the letter and actually get it looking kind of nice and consistent, all right? And this is where that penciling in can be very useful, especially if you still want to keep your letters hollow after the fact. Like if you want to do a black outline of the letters and then color them in with a different color pen or anything like that, then pre-planning can be really useful. If you're just going to fill it all in with black anyways, it doesn't really matter, okay? So for this one, we're just going to assume that hypothetical person who's doing this lettering, they're just going to go fill it in after the fact. I often find that when I do a cursive S and I want to do a fauxligraphy S, I need to thicken it from both sides to varying amounts to get it looking good. And this is where that nuance creeps back in. We love nuance. It's really, really helpful for giving people set instructions for how to do things. Said nobody ever. But we're going to get our pen out. We're going to attempt to thicken this in a way that feels right for this letter form. For this guy in particular, we'd probably thicken to the underside for most part, and then neaten up by thickening on top, okay? So thickening underneath goes along here. That looks pretty good, but we also want to make sure that we catch this kind of tail. Well, I guess it's not really the tail, it's kind of the leading end, isn't it? It's the one that's at the very top. We need to capture that part in there as well. So we're going to add a little bit to that one. Okay, just gently curving it into the existing letter. I'm going to bring it a little closer again so you can hopefully see it. Oh, abuse. Hit my microphone, so sorry. Hope it wasn't loud. So you can kind of see how we've had to do a little bit of a combination piece here so that then the thickening throughout the letter looks consistent and we've been able to capture the entire of the downward stroke, okay? So if you are going to be doing this so that you're just coloring it in, in full black or whatnot after the fact, then doing it like this is totally fine. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. If you want to do it so that then you're going to have to try and color it in with a different color, for instance, if you're doing a black outline and then you want to fill it in with pink or something, really whatever color you're looking for, it's not going to be very easy to cover over the initial letter form. Remember that red section would initially, usually be in black. If you're going to do that, then doing it with pencil first is going to be probably a little bit more useful. Or as you start to get more used to this, you can actually kind of what's the way of wording this? You kind of start to appreciate how doing the S initially needs to be done in order to make it so that you're thickening it, what I'm going to say, properly, okay? So for instance, if we think about the S that we've done here, and we draw it out so that we only had to thicken it from one direction, we can maybe make the top of the S quite big and then the bottom of the S quite small. This looks kind of silly to start with, okay? It does not really look like an S. It kind of looks more like a lowercase delta, but that's fine. Then from here, when I go and add my thickened section in, I would thicken it to what I'm going to say the top or the right-hand side. So thickening up from here, goes around and down, and then add in the other side of that little swoopy tail piece. Maybe make it a little bit, more rounded at the top, kind of a thing. So you can start to get a feel for where you'd actually need to put the initial line work, but it can be a little bit tricky. Yeah. Littlest Bean is trying to grab my hands. Hi. All right, no, grab my hands. I need to write things. But yeah, it is one of those really fun, super great practice. Love that. Oh, how unsatisfying. But that's effectively how it's going to work out. So just going and thickening up this one here, just like I did last time, I'm going to thicken underneath for the majority of it. And then just to make sure that I capture that top section, I'm going to thicken up that part as well. Gorgeous, right? Not so gorgeous if I don't want to just go color this in after the fact, but gorgeous. When it comes to the T, again, the T. When it comes to T, it really depends on where you've put that bar, if you've put the bar in to start with at all. Oftentimes when I do a fauxligraphy T, I won't actually cross the T until after I've put the thickened section in, just to make sure that I have, one, room for the thickened section, all right, that line thickening is going to go in unobstructed, and two, I also don't necessarily like the bar to cross through the thickened section. Like we said, if you're going to be coloring this in after the fact, you put your T in, you put in your thickened section, possibly with the same colored pen, but not for this example, and then you go and put in the bar afterwards so that you can color this in with a different color or a pattern or whatever it is that you want to use without that line going through the thickened section. For us though, we're just going to use this one here, and I'm going to thicken. Now you could do to the left or right here. I'm going to do to the right, even though this turned section is probably a little too narrow for it. I would usually prefer it to be just a little bit wider, so that then when I go and add the thickened section in, it doesn't start to kind of look a little bit too tight, a little bit too pinched. So widening that letter form, especially the turn, to make it so we actually have space for that. Okay, and that is what I have tried to keep in mind when I did my U and my W in particular, especially for doing the W and putting that kind of thickened section in. It's effectively like an inverse M, all right? We want to make it a fair bit wider than it usually would feel comfortable to do, so that then when we put the thickened sections in, it actually has room to breathe. But putting the U's sections in, right? So just anywhere that pen has been brought in a downwards direction. Just move this up a little bit so it's a little bit more central. So that would be this part and this part. For the V, it's usually only this part here. Kind of depends on how you do your letter V's. I know that some people do a V that's a little bit more like V and then it like curves over. So in this case, anywhere that has that downwards kind of direction would be the side that we've already done, but then also probably this part here, even if only a little bit. Some people choose to just keep it open as well, but it depends on how you like to do it. I typically do my lowercase v's like this, and I just connect them with a little flick over rather than a loop. So it's always good to have options though. Okay. When it comes to the W, all right, like we said, the W needed to be drawn a fair bit wider so that then we can put that thickened section in and it doesn't look cramped. I'm going to be doing my thickened sections towards the right-hand side because I allowed room for it as I went through. Okay, so that would be here. Kind of curving it with the letter form as we put it in and tucking it in at the bottom so that it kind of neatly merges into the line work that we already had. Similar idea on the next one, so curve it over and then merge it in to the bottom, right? But you see how now as we've put those thickened sections in, these, I don't know, what are the lower loops called? Troughs. The troughs of the W don't look as exaggerated anymore because we've gone and added a little bit more line work in there. All right. So for X, X again is going to be one of those letters that trips people up. Completely understand. I find that the only part of an X that I really do thicken up is going to be the, what are we going to call it? The bar that comes from the top left to the bottom right. Okay. So even though typically when I do an X, I will not even necessarily use the same kind of direction. Okay, let's see. When people draw an X, do they do, this is another personal question, okay? Option 1. Do you do down, down? Do you do option 2, down, up? Do you do 3? I guess up is also an option. Up. Or do you do 4, which is up, down? God, that is certainly not the way that I do it, because that one really tripped me up. So which option do you draw your X's? Do you do option 1, 2, 3, or 4? It doesn't necessarily have to be in the order that I drew it in, because technically speaking, we could double up all of these and think about which line went in first. So we've got a good chunk of 1s. Alrighty, while you guys are responding, I'm gonna drink break. Yeah. All right. We have a lot of 1s. We've got a 2, a couple of 2s, 1 or 2. Nice. Your name is Roxanne and you use 1 a gazillion times a day. Fair. Alrighty, so it's mostly 1 or 2. We don't have a lot of people who are doing both from the bottom, and 4, it felt so unnatural doing 4. So completely understand that. So oftentimes when we're doing an X in a kind of calligraphy sense, the kind of assumption, I guess, that most calligraphy lends itself to is option 2. Okay, so in that case, if it was option 2, we're just going to pretend at least. Then the only one that actually gets thickened is the one that comes from the top left down to the bottom right. Okay, so in the case of this guy, that would be thickening over the top here, bringing it down towards the bottom, and then kind of curving it in nicely with what we've already got there. And this guy that cuts across from the bottom left to the top right just stays as is. If you were to thicken both of them with this kind of fauxligraphy lettering style, it might look a little bit odd, because the equivalent is effectively, if we find my black pen, there we go. It'd be like having that in the middle of your nice calligraphy, rather than having, remember, Jess's calligraphy isn't great, but that. Then we're just going to draw the bar the other way. Oh, abuse. Sorry. You're right next to my microphone. Yeah. So you can kind of see how this would look a little bit strange, hopefully, if you were trying to do like a calligraphy kind of style, whereas this does look a little bit nicer. X is just one of those weird letters, though. So for the most part, in most calligraphy styles, you are going to see this kind of a thing where just top left to bottom right is thickened. So that's what we're going to put on here. But moving on to the Y, right? Y, much like our, J and G and A, I'm going to thicken the inside of this part and then to the right of that part. Wee, curving it over so that it touches the bottom. Looks pretty cute. All right. Now we have Z. Boo hiss. Z is not my favorite letter, but if we are going to be doing it, the way that I've drawn this Z probably best lends itself to being thickened to the right-hand side. And in terms of where those downward strokes are, we go and have a little label. We like labels. We're going to do that one. Goes up, then it curves around and down. Then the next one comes around and down as well. And then it changes direction and goes up to the side. Okay? So it's going to be this little bump and that larger bump that are going to be the ones that actually get thickened up. I'm going to make sure that I've got that on focus to here. And I'm going to thicken it to the right-hand side, so curving out from the top and then coming in. And then coming out from the middle and going down and in. Right. Again, trying to keep it fairly consistent, but I do find that Z is not super fun. Oftentimes when I do a lowercase Z, 1, I don't. So that's a really good strategy. Just change the spelling of the word to fit what the letters that you refuse to do. Or 2, I'll often just do a Z like this one. Yeah. And then just thicken that downward stroke there. And then usually I like to put a little bar in it, because that's how I typically draw my Zs when I'm just writing. So yeah, usually I'll do a Z more like this, but a little bit neater, because that looks a little bit tragic, but it's okay. All right. So this gives us kind of the general lettering kind of style we're going to be using for each of our letters as they are. When it comes to actually forming words, though, okay, this is where one, pencil can be so super helpful because for individual letters, we get kind of, focused on how that letter looks into itself. But then when you're trying to, join them to other letters, you need to be a little bit more considerate. Ugh. And two, just to get like the spacing of everything right can be a little bit tricky because not only are you trying to think of like the lettering next to each letter and how that space works, but then also allowing space for the thickened sections and then like, the heights and the widths and just making things look consistent. All in all, I do recommend pencil first. But when it comes to actually looping these things together, what you can do is go letter by letter, right? So kind of similar to how we attacked the M. So did like, each of the parts of the M and then went and, colored it in after the fact or whatever else. You can do that. Or you can write out the entire word in your monoline cursive and then after that go and try and put in the thickened sections. So for instance, like if we did, it's always hello, right? We always like that's my go-to practice word. So we can just letter in H E L L, trying to get double letters that look consistent is the bane of my existence. O, and it's really great when you have a name where every name has a double letter, but that's fine. So we can try and letter the whole thing in first and then go and thicken the downstrokes. So exactly the same as we tackled each of the letters individually, we're going to do the same thing again. All right. So we've got that one, and then internal for the E because it's my preference, internal for the L. On the second L, we could do a different one, especially if you've made the loop, like, I don't know, too small or whatever. It's really just about finding a way that looks good for what you've done. And then do the O. And just like we talked about before, when it comes to filling these in, you can fill them in with whatever kind of style you want to. We're just going to go color these in so you can kind of see what the finished product would look like. Color that in very carefully. If you've actually used a black outline on these, then it's even easier because you have something to guide you that is the same color as what you're coloring in with. But I went and did mine with gray just to kind of show the difference between where we started and where we ended up. Yeah, started with the black outline, now we're here. Also, you don't actually have to color it in with a brush marker either. Obviously, like you can use any coloring in style. I mean, you could technically use paint if you want to do. But there is our fake calligraphy, yeah? So we did not actually use a brush pen, except for the coloring in. We didn't use the brush pen to letter the letters in. We've just used it to kind of like fake the letter forms, which is kind of cool. So in terms of the way that you can kind of use this, all right? Like we said, there are a variety of different styles. It doesn't just have to be the ones that we've got here, like, just keeping them open. You can go and color them in with different colors. You can do gradients. You can actually get very, very creative with it. I'm going to go grab you an example. So sit tight for a second. Roll on over to my shelf. So we actually have a separate video on the channel which talks about how to kind of do decorative lettering styles and such after the fact. So make sure we're on the right page. This guy here. Okay. So these are some examples of how you can fill in the letters to kind of help you fit with your theme and stuff like this. Obviously, I did not do this lettering myself, like the actual outline. I just went and printed it off the computer because I'm like, yeah, I just need something that's an example. And of course, it's hello. But you can fill these in with a variety of different things. You can do gradient kind of style lettering if you wanted to, where each letter is maybe a different color or it has a gradient from the top to the bottom. Or you can get very, very creative with it and kind of fill it in with different pictures and stuff like this. So these are like little minion letters. We have, different types of animal print that you can do, which is cool. You can do the Zentangles in the middle of those hollowed out sections, which is really awesome. I especially just love the fact that, like, once you've done the outline, okay, once you've got the outlines done of your letters, there are so many different ways you can make it fit with your theme. Yeah? Okay, so Wonder Woman, no, yes. Did I do Wonder Woman or Captain Marvel? Now I'm confused. I think it's Wonder Woman. I'm gonna say it is. Please, yell at me in the comments. Also, please don't yell at me in the comments. Sally, like from Nightmare Before Christmas. All right, so there's a bunch of different things we can do, which is very fun. Okay, obviously these styles are an outline that also accounts for that thin section as well. So if you're going to want to do this in a specific color, you might want to consider what outline color you're using, because ours is black, which is fine. All right, you can still go in and color it in using those different styles, but that is something to consider when you go through with this. I know I have a page somewhere that also has gradient lettering, because I'd love to be able to show you that. I just can't remember. Haha, there you are, where I've put it. So you can also do different styles of gradients. So like we said, you could do a gradient where each of the individual letters is a different color, or you can kind of make it so that they blend in between different spaces. So that's something that you could also consider with that. Or you can do a gradient within the letter. So for instance, or rather within the word, sorry. So darken it up from the bottom and blend to the top. Okay. So that's also something to consider. The rainbow kind of looks like a balloon. Yeah. So the way that we've done this one to make it look a little bit more kind of balloon-esque is by going and adding a white highlight to those thickened sections. Specifically for me, I always like to do it on the left-hand side of any of those thickened sections. Okay. This one here was achieved by just kind of coloring in the bottom and the top, and then using one of your blender pens, which, like, if you get an old pack of Tombos, I'm pretty sure every single one came with a blender pen. And you can just like blend those in to the middle section, or you can just use a paintbrush with the tiniest amount of water, because the Tombow dual brush markers are, as we say, water-based markers. Okay, so that is something that you can do as well, which is kind of cool. Right. Both this lettering style one and the one from before do already have separate videos on the channel. They are older though, so you either have to do a search or scroll back. I wouldn't recommend scrolling back. I would just do a search. Oh, one of them has picked up the other journal. So, do you guys have any questions? Okay, I do see that we have some new members, so congratulations for joining Whoopah, the team with a capital T. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. Very exciting to add you along. Make sure that you come over and join the Discord, because you have your own personal section over there with other team members. It's good to have you on board with us. But does anybody have any other questions about this kind of lettering style? Obviously, this is a bit of a crash course. Like we said, all of this does take practice. The dreaded P word, but it is the kind of thing that, like, over time you do get way better at it. Like, if I'm gonna go grab my first journal for you. I'm gonna show you what my lettering style has kind of evolved from. and hopefully it'll kind of highlight the fact that things do change. Now, I will say that the lettering, oh gosh, see, Jess not accounting for the fact that you're going to thicken the downstrokes and then thickening the wrong parts. Also, curving the letters over at different points. Like, this was my first journal, right? And as it stands, I know that some people are going to look at that and be like, Jess, it's not actually bad. I'm like, yeah, okay, it's not half bad. I remember how long that took me though. Like, if we're going to go through and critique the lettering here, okay, so to make sure that it actually looks as nice as possible. For instance, this L, yeah, we've curved that over, and it's kind of come a little bit too far into the section that is not, what's the word? It's not actually a downstroke anymore. This one's another example of it, which is really good. You see how that thickened section has come too far across to the right? That is what is making this letter look a little bit weird compared to how I would kind of do it now. Yeah. Alrighty. How do you connect if the connection goes down like a W? How do you connect if the connection goes down? Can you give me an example word? Because if you can give me an example word, I can show you how I would connect it. How do you connect if the connection goes down? trying to figure out how to interpret that, because for me, when I do a W, I'm trying to think of a W word that's not right. Weirdly, W R W. I'm gonna do W. W. Okay, now I feel like I want to curve it. E, I, R, D, Y. Weirdly. Ugh, hits the microphone. Very rude. So often when I curve a W, I actually do a loop, which I notably haven't included here. So that would be thickened here, thickened down the loop just a little bit, thickened the E, the I, down the R, but just a little bit, off the side, D, side here too, make that come down but not too far, L, and then Y. Ugh, I'm getting very close to my microphone, which is why I'm going a little bit weird with this. But hopefully you can kind of see where that would get thickened up. And then from here, you can go and color things in so that then it actually looks like you've kind of faked your calligraphy, which is nice. So that's how I would connect a W and an E at the very least. Let's see, what's another word? I'm going to go check the comments and see if you had a word for me. Like into an O or an E. So that's how I would connect a W and an E. So I'd actually kind of bring it up and then curve it down into the E. How would I connect it to other letters? Let's just go and do like a full alphabet here of W into. I will also say, okay, if you're ever like, oh God, how do I connect, this letter to that letter, or, how do I actually thicken up a letter properly or anything like that? The easiest way to figure it out, I find, is to actually just go online and find like a free font website. So like I think it's called like 1001 free fonts or defont.com or like anything like that. Literally Google like free fonts. Okay. Whatever website comes up, then you can go and find a lettering style which is a cursive style, and then just either download it if it's a free one, because we literally just searched free fonts, and then type it into your word processor and use it. Or oftentimes these websites will also actually just let you kind of sample the font by typing in your own words. That can be really useful as well, because then they kind of show you how they connect to each other, which is really, really good. I do exactly the same thing for drop shadowing because I am really bad at figuring out where a drop shadow is supposed to go. I'm getting better at it, but anytime I'm just like, oh God, I'm not getting this right, it's not looking quite, the way it should, I will literally just go and search like, drop shadow fonts and find one that does the drop shadowing for me so I can see where I need to place it for the lettering that I'm trying to do. Hopefully that helps. But yeah, okay, so W is one of those fun ones. You can link it across like this, or you can loop it around and go into the same one. Let's see. W. We're gonna do a speed run of W, okay? So these might end up looking a little bit weird because I'm not thinking about it too much. So if I do W A, W B, W C, W D, W. See, part of me just wants to curve that one all the way up. We're going to do two different styles. W, E, F, G. I'm going to have to do a double line here, aren't I? I'll just like stick it out a little bit. Just make the W really big. H. Because WH is one that I probably use quite often because it's like whole, while, I don't know, whim. WH. I. J, K. That one looks a little bit whack, but that's fine. H, I, J, K, L, N, N, O, work. Yeah, that makes sense. P, Q. Oh, that went a little bit skew with cattywampus because I was like, how do we do a Q again? And then just kind of like kept going for too far. Yeah, I know. An example word should have been word, eh? Q, W. This is where I really just want to do a curved one. R, S. Okay, we're going to do those, and then we're going to do the same thing but with a loop. So W that comes into a loop. How do I do a loop like that? Yeah. And that looks a little bit weird now, doesn't it? W. That looks too loopy. I guess it just depends on like what actually looks good for the word that you're writing, because oftentimes I will change which one I do depending on the word, especially when it comes to R. All right, so sometimes I'll do a looped R, sometimes I'll just do like a up down flick R. W E W F W G H I J, because that one looks a little bit strange. I think I prefer this one. K L M N O and P. So hopefully that kind of illustrates the potential different ways that we can do it. So yeah, in terms of a W, oftentimes I will do like a loop for some of them, like an E. Like that makes sense to me. Whereas other ones I'll just flick across to it. It just depends on if it starts to look a little bit weird. Like W with an I think that looks a little bit strange because it kind of almost starts to look like an R. Because WR, which I'll do down here, like that looks a little bit weird. If you're going to do a W like that, then it doesn't look as weird. Yeah, so it probably just depends on what kind of lettering style you're going with. I guess then if we're doing a curvy, this is curly curly, and that's not curly, not curly, we should do a not curly, curly. So 4 different variations depending on what actually fits. Alrighty. Any other questions before we toddle off? Because hopefully this has been helpful. I mean, I know that, as we said, we love it so much. It does take practice. It has a little bit of nuance kind of a thing. But remember to grab yourself the practice lettering sheet, because it's funnily enough, it's literally there for practice. It is literally what we've just been doing together today. So for instance, like the B, you would go, down and then curve around and go over. But then when you want to thicken the downstrokes, you need to then go thicken up one side, thicken up the other side, okay? And that's why these lettering sheets are there for you, okay? So for a C, we draw the C in first. And then we go and thicken the internal line like we talked about before. You want to do a D, we go up and around. And then you can just do a single kind of stem, or you can do a loopy kind of stem like I like to do. And then go and thicken those up as well, right? So you can kind of see like the lettering sheets have a bunch of practice like with a guideline and then a bunch of space after it so that you can practice it yourself. This is pretty much exactly the same style that I'd use for the team with a capital T. So every month when they get their practice sheet, it effectively looks like this, but with a different style of lettering. So if you're part of the team with a capital T, you have that to look forward to. It's coming out tomorrow. Alrighty. So if you guys don't have any other questions, then make sure to check out our lettering kind of playlist that we have. So that goes through like how to do the gradient lettering that we talked about before. It also has a bunch of other fun lettering styles. Like if cursive isn't your thing, then we do have a bunch of other ones that you can try out, which are a little bit of fun. They can tie in really nicely with a bunch of different themes that you're doing. That one is linked on screen, especially if you're here on the replay. So click or tap on that one and I will see you over there.